we'll make a start because there are people trickling in. They're still coming in one by one, but we should now begin. So hello, everybody, and welcome to this event. My name is Andrew Copson. I'm the Chief Executive of Humanists UK, which has organised this book launch. And it is a book launch event, albeit a few months later than expected, for the Little Book of Humanism. And I'm delighted to be joined by Alice Roberts, the co-author of the Little Book of Humanism. We're going to talk a little bit about the book, and then there's a possibility to, in fact, not just the possibility, but the necessity of people to ask questions and have engagement about the book. But before we get to questions, although that will be the main aspect of this evening, we'll just have some introductory remarks. And I'm delighted to say that the introductory remarks will be from Alice. Say hello, Alice.
Hello, everybody.
And she will be known to you all, president of Humanists UK, and a very excellent president too, if I might say so, and of course one of the authors of the Little Book of Humanism. So Alice, tell us all about remind me why we did this book.
Well, we've been talking about it for a while, haven't we, Andrew? And it's so amazing to see it here as a physical reality. And I'm just really pleased we've been able to do that this year as well, because it's been difficult to get things off the ground this year. I'm sure everybody's found that. But we've had a really overwhelming response to it in terms of both people buying it. I mean, it's, went straight into the Sunday Times Bestseller List and was up there on Amazon. And it's amazing, the response. The publishers were quite taken by surprise, actually, quite overwhelmed by it. Obviously, Andrew and I knew that there would be a huge appetite for it. And we've had some really lovely comments from people on social media as well, which I think are really heartening, because you put a book together and write it and edit it, and you hope that it's going to have the particular impact that was your ambition for it. And I think some of the comments coming back show me that it really is having that impact. So I became president of Humanists UK 2 years ago, and I immediately started thinking about what we could do to really broaden humanism out and reach a much, much wider audience. And there's lots of stuff that Humanists UK is already doing in that regard. Obviously, there's a whole series of public lectures that go on, and this year some of that has moved online. And there's the annual convention, which I would like to be rebadged as a festival, but never mind. And there's also things like the fantastic MOOCs as well. So those have had a great response. But when it comes to the literature around humanism, I was I kind of looked at what was out there, and I was doing a lot of reading around humanism as I became president. I mean, I did know a bit about humanism before I became president, but I was doing more and more reading around and thinking, gosh, there's such a rich tradition of literature which is humanist, and I think that there aren't many books that bring all that together and make it that visible. It's kind of scattered because it's everywhere, and because it's very ancient as well. So there are some absolutely fantastic books about humanism out there, and great books about secularism as well. I've got this rather lovely one back here. I don't know who wrote that, but it's really nice, that one.
What a beautiful cover.
It's a very lovely cover, isn't it, Andrew? And I thought, well, I'd really like there to be something which is just really accessible, the kind of book that you could pick up and you could leaf through, the kind of book where you might be feeling in a philosophical mood and you just want to indulge yourself in a bit of thinking about the world around you or living a good life, all of those things. And I started talking to Andrew about it, and we came up with the idea of Little Book of Humanism. And really from the beginning, the idea was to mine that very deep and rich tradition of humanism that goes right back to ancient philosophers. And I think sometimes people say to me, humanism, newfangled thing, it's a new religion. It's like, no, well, the whole point is it's not a religion, and it's utterly not newfangled. It's been going on for thousands of years, and it is just this way of thinking which combines, I think, the best of being human, the sort of the rationality with the empathy and the kindness together. So I think that humanism is a good thing, obviously, as president of Humanists UK, and I think that scientific literacy and critical thinking help us to make better decisions, both individually and as a society as well. And by better, I very much mean decisions that really promote human flourishing. So that's what we have in our sights, I think, as humanists. And also, I do believe that science is the most powerful tool that we have, not only for understanding the world around us, but for actually helping us to live in that world, to improve our own lives, and to look after our planet too. So some people have this misconception about humanism that it's almost sort of it sets humans apart because it has human in the title. I don't see it like that at all. As a biologist, I very much see humans as part of biology, and humanism, really means using the best of what it is to be human to look after ourselves, but I think to look after the planet as well. And I also see science as a fundamental cornerstone of culture too. So, mythology is fantastic, but science is much better. It's an amazing source of wonder and inspiration and creativity. And I feel the same way about humanism. So I've got this, I suppose, philosophy about science as a human endeavor, which should be used to promote human flourishing as much as possible. And I think that humanism is also something which has the power to change lives for the better, to change societies for the better. And I think there's an enormous potential for humanism to do that. And I don't mean that in a wishy-washy way at all. And I, even though it's called the Little Book of Humanism, and it is beautiful and small, and it's a little gem-like thing, it's not the spiritual descendant of the Little Book of Calm. It's something much, much more profound than that, of course, which I would say is one of its authors. And I wanted to, another reason for writing it, I suppose, was to not just make the subject accessible, but to raise the visibility of humanism as an idea and a philosophy. I mean, I became a humanist pretty late in life, or at least started attaching that label to myself pretty late in life. I started off being quite thoroughly indoctrinated as a child, and grew up as an Anglican, or at least I was a child of devout Anglican parents, which is kind of the same thing. And they were very keen that I toed the line in terms of my personal beliefs. And then as a teenager, when I was really focusing on studying science and asking questions, I think I found as many people who start off religious and then lose religion or reject religion find that if you ask enough questions, there aren't any answers. And I felt I couldn't place belief in any sort of deity. So for me, that turned into quite a frank atheism. But I know that amongst humanists, there are agnostics all the way through to more kind of staunch atheists. I don't know if I'd describe myself as a staunch atheist, but I don't find that the idea of a God, because I can't see any evidence for a God, I don't find the idea of a God has any relevance. And that actually it's up to us to meet the challenges that are there in front of us. So I decided when I was a teenager that I was atheist. And I always had a bit of an issue with that, because I felt it was as though I was having to define myself in terms of an absence, and define myself in terms of something that was missing. And I think that that's often something that comes out in conversation with religious people, actually, that they say, oh, but there's this thing that's missing from you, that you're somehow deficient. And so when I found out about humanism, I thought, no, actually, this is what I believe. I believe that the source of goodness is within us as humans, and that we can make good decisions about our lives, and that it's up to us to make our societies better. So I think I was trying to work it out, Andrew. I think I probably properly started thinking about humanism when I met Jim Al-Khalili. And I've known Jim for many years. We've worked together on all sorts of science outreach, as you can imagine. We're both passionate about public engagement with science. And so I think, I probably met him in the late 90s, early noughties, somewhere like Cheltenham Science Festival it would have been. And talking to him about humanism, I suddenly then realized that actually this was something that I very much identified with. And so many people have expressed that in response to the Little Book of Humanism. So, we get lots and lots and lots of responses on social media saying, I've wondered what to call my outlook on life. And it seems like a very natural outlook on life. And this perfectly captures it. And at the heart of it is an approach to the world and the self that's rational. And there's no cooked up mystery. There's no smoke and mirrors. We look to natural causes and explanations rather than looking for supernatural explanations, including deities, of course. So whether that ends up being atheism or agnosticism, the deities are part of that kind of more supernatural way of looking at the world. And combined with that rational focus, there's also a really strong focus on this idea that this is the life we have, because we can't see any evidence for an afterlife. And in an absence of that evidence, you think, well, you can't bet your life on there being something after death. And so we focus on this life and not the life hereafter, because as far as we know, there isn't one. And humanism, I've mentioned human flourishing. It has a really, really strong humanitarian basis. That's the reason I'm particularly passionate about it. That, we bring together rationality and logical thinking with empathy and kindness, what Steven Pinker called the better angels of our nature. And humanists share the belief that we have the power to make good choices, to lead a good life, and that hope for a better future really depends on the choices that we make and our own human capacities, our capacities for reason, love, and empathy. And I discussed, I've told Andrew this story before, but I discussed humanism with a local vicar who never really heard of humanism before. And she was a vicar that, went into school to teach children about religion, but wasn't aware of humanism as a thing, and was sort of curious and started off the conversation thinking that perhaps there would be some kind of emptiness within me, I think. And I told her a bit about what humanism was. And we found a lot of common ground, which obviously ended at the point where there were supernatural beliefs that I don't ascribe to. And we tried to kind of nail down the difference in what we really believed, and stripping out the kind of rationality and the belief in God, and sort of thinking, in terms of what we believe about humans and our capacity to make the world a better place for ourselves and for others. So what is the difference then? Is there a difference between us? And I think that we got down to the nub of it, in a way, the crux of it, in that. And she agreed with me that I suggested that I thought that the source of goodness came from within people, whereas she thought it was external. So that somehow humans needed to be saved by some kind of external force, or at least helped by some external force to be good. Whereas as a humanist, I believe we have that power within us. So going back to, I suppose, me as a teenager, I felt that leaving behind a religion for me was less about cutting something out of my philosophy and leaving a hole behind, and it was more like decluttering. It was more like I had to be brave about it, but if I removed myself from that particular worldview and that philosophy, I was clearing away ways of thinking that were actually unnecessary and unhelpful constraints. And what I was left with was a clarity of thinking. So rather than relying on scripture for moral guidance, I could depend on my own moral sense, and I could develop that sense through experience, learning from others, and turning to the whole of the rest of literature to find human wisdom. So, that's the wonderful thing about humanism, is we're not dependent on, a particular set of scripture. We can look to all of literature and find humanist wisdom there. It's really diverse. I've already mentioned some of the books that focus specifically on humanism, like that little book of Secularism, which is allied, and the lovely handbook of humanism. Yes, that's edited by Andrew and AC Grayling, of course. And there's a nice small short introduction to humanism, but again quite academic. So I wanted to work on something with Andrew which was a bit wider and a bit more accessible than that, and also going right back to very early humanistic thinkers, because the roots go right back to philosophy in ancient China, India, and Greece, and we've got that in the Little Book of Humanism. And then going all the way through, of course, you've got fantastic Enlightenment philosophers. Humanism really starts to emerge and take hold as an idea in the Enlightenment, which I very much see as a time when people were returning to those pre-monotheistic ideas, in a way, going back to those ancient ways of thinking, and again decluttering. So those kind of ideas about the world being natural, not infused with supernatural forces or divinity, that humans have it within themselves to be better people and make the world a better place. And you just realize when you start looking at the literature that so many people through history have had those thoughts. And I think it is useful to try and collect them together. And I suspect that way of thinking actually, which I think once you arrive at it, does seem so natural and obvious. I suspect that it was much more prevalent in the past than we can even see today. Because of course, what happened with the hegemony of religion was that you kind of had to ascribe to it, even if it wasn't what you believed deep down. And it was very difficult for a very long time for people to express any doubts about a particular religion, especially if it was tied up, of course, with state and government. And then, of course, religions themselves they've known through time the power that comes with knowledge, and so they've been very, very close guardians of that knowledge. They've kept that knowledge very, very, very close to them. And we kind of see that as well in history. We see the furore that within a religion, translating the Bible into English had. The idea that you would make it accessible. It wasn't meant to be accessible. It's meant to be knowledge which is closely guarded. So I think there's probably a lot of that. I think there's probably been a lot of humanist thinking that's just gone. We haven't had it written down because religion had so much control over what was written down. So what about today then? More and more people are discovering humanism, or perhaps a better way of putting it is that they're discovering that humanism as I hesitate to call it a label, Andrew, but as a description. Describes how they're already thinking. And I think sometimes that idea or that realization comes along when they're standing back and they've got time to reflect and think about life and death. And say that might come along at a time when you're wanting to mark a life event. So thinking about how you mark the birth of a new child, a new partnership, or indeed a death. So when people are thinking about the social ceremonies that mark those life events, that's when they might start thinking about humanism. And certainly I've found that amongst my own family, that there are members of my sort of wider family that haven't really thought about humanism at all, but when it comes to planning a funeral, have suddenly been faced with the fact that the person that has just died certainly wasn't religious, and they're not religious either. And what do? I put them in touch with Humanist UK, of course. So I think for a lot of people, humanism does encapsulate what they already think about the world, but there's so much more to read, of course. So that's my own personal experience, that I was a humanist before I even realized it. So Andrew and I talked about it and came up with this sort of harebrained scheme that has turned into reality. And we wanted to raise awareness. We wanted to do something about this wonderful, diverse wellspring of literature, and show how it's all bound together by this underlying theme of humanism. So, Andrew, I think you were immediately enthusiastic about this idea when I suggested it to you.
I was immediately enthusiastic.
Always delightful when you suggest something to somebody and they go, yeah, let's do it. So we talked to different publishers and found a home for it with Little Brown. And right from the beginning, we wanted it to be a book where we would write some of it and explain, write biographies of key people, write a little bit about certain philosophical traditions, that sort of thing. But there are also a lot of quotes in it, and so it was a real joy to put together, because we both did a lot of reading, and I think we learned a lot from each other, because I was bringing more of the kind of sciencey quotes and excerpts to Andrew, and he was opening me up a bit to some rather wonderful novels and history, which has been fantastic, and philosophy. So I'm really pleased to be here officially launching it, although of course we have already soft launched it into the world, and it's doing.
But this is the real night. This is the
real night.
Yeah, this is when it's real. I hadn't dared to believe in it until today.
And we also decided when we did it that I don't think the publishers wanted us to say, I don't know why they didn't want us to say this, but we've decided that we are, whatever the publishers are doing, we are donating the royalties back to Humanists UK, and they're being used to particularly train up new humanist celebrants. We thought that was very apt indeed. So I'm really pleased to be here this evening with my co-author and with all of you as well, and we've got lots of questions coming in already.
We've got some great questions coming in. It's interesting that you should say that about how people realize that humanism describes what they believe. I remember that the first person in your role, the first president of Humanists UK that I knew was Claire Rayner when I first started at Humanists UK, and she said exactly the same thing. You know, for decades she'd had a humanist view, and it wasn't until she heard the word and learned about, as it then was, the British Humanist Association, that she realized what it was that described what she believed. And she said two other things as well, though, which I think is two of the things that we wanted to achieve with this book, is that when she found that, it was also when she found, that there was a word humanist, she said it also felt, in a sense, like coming home. She found that she had a conversation, an ongoing conversation that she was part of. She had a sort of sense of belonging. And I think that's very interesting, because we said in the introduction to this book, humanism is an ongoing conversation down the centuries, a dynamic and developing exchange of views and ideas, and you're welcome to it, come to it and take part in it. And I think that's, a lot of people reflect that has been very beneficial for them. And the second thing that she said in relation to that, in addition to just realizing that humanists describe what she believed and being very pleased to at last have a word to describe what it believed, is that it also helped her develop her beliefs. It also helped her think more about it. The moment when she was able to say, oh, it's a humanist view I've got, it's a humanist approach to life, at that moment it sort of came into focus. It had greater coherence, and so she was able to think about her beliefs, how they related to each other, do a bit of mental spring cleaning. If I believe this, do I really believe that? And it just gave a framework for thinking about it. And I think that's not going to be everyone's experience, but I think it's a very valuable experience. So it was,
that really chimes with me, because it is that kind of clarity of suddenly going, right, there was all this kind of clutter that was there that was getting in the way, and actually I can be much clearer about it now. And also the kind of permission to approach everything critically, which is that kind of scientific perspective and that rational perspective. But I think that, it's really interesting that it's such a common theme. One of the things which really frustrates me, and we will get onto questions, but one of the things that really frustrates me is when you get religious people kind of going, oh, but are you some kind of moral vacuum because you don't believe in God? Or, but what about morals and ethics?
I don't even understand that question.
I don't understand it. I mean, question. What about teaching children? We need religion in order to teach children morals and ethics. And you just go, no, that's absolutely, that's crazy. And also I find it really quite offensive because there's this kind of suggestion that you're not thinking deeply enough, and that you only, if you're religious, can you think deeply enough to start really engaging with those moral and ethical questions in life. And I think that, given that most people in Britain are not religious, I think there are many deeply moral and ethical people who are not
right religious. And that most people who've ever lived have not been members of the religions currently available.
No,
I mean, that's also what do people think of the majority of human ancestors, that they were, moral vacuums? This is such a strange point of view. It's like you said. I mean, this is a really important thing about the humanist approach to life, I think, is that we don't think that there are, that you need an external source of value and commandment to be good. Like you say, it's actually built in part on our social instincts. It comes from inside us, both individually and together, the sort of conversations we're having now. I think it was really good that we managed to get thinkers who were saying that in the little book, not just recently, but for example, Mencius from China, 2,600 years ago, saying, this is in you. It's like a spark. You just need to kindle, just to bring out these feelings, and you will know how to be moral, how to be good. It doesn't come from outside. You're not a fallen, broken thing. You are an entity that has that in them. Just bring it out, kindle it.
You're not a fallen thing. What's the lovely Pratchett quote?
That's right.
I'd rather be a rising ape than a fallen angel.
Yeah, that's a brilliant one.
In there
with a great picture as
well.
Let's
do some questions.
So John, the first question comes from John White. Odd question. If someone believes in God, they can express gratitude for the benefits of life. How do humanists express gratitude, and who to? Gratitude.
That's I think gratitude is an emotion that is I think it's quite general, and I think that when good things happen to us, because I think humans are very we just seek cause and effect basically, and it's a good survival instinct. You look for, if something bad happens, you look for the instigator of that bad thing and run away from them,
and a way to prevent it happening again.
And if something good happens, you gravitate towards the agent. So you look for agency in the world. So I think that, as a humanist, I would say I accept that there is no agency behind, and if something happens to me, which is, a chance event, but it turns out well for me, that's lovely. But it's difficult not to feel grateful. So I just feel grateful in a very vague way to the universe, but not in a kind of new agey, I think the universe really cares about me.
I think it's better to try and feel lucky. I think that's how I like to think of it, because gratitude implies that you've got, like you say, something to be grateful to, but it also sort of, I think, always implies that somehow you're special, that you've been granted given a benefit or a gift. And I think that can sort of confuse the issue of desserts, of somehow it can sometimes make you think, I'm grateful for this gift or for this reward. Whereas if we think about the good luck that we've had, to whatever we might attribute it, you and I have discussed this before, because I know you feel very strongly about contingency in life and how it's important from a humanist point of view to realize and recognize that what, your good fortune is just fortune. It's just luck. You can't feel that you've overly, that you're a terribly splendid person for having landed in this particular position, or or that you're a bad person, turpitudinous person to have landed in this bad position. So I think an attitude of gratitude can actually be quite harmful, morally harmful, especially.
And as you say, the corollary of it is that there has to be an attitude of guilt, or feeling
exactly.
if something bad
people
happens
can
to
be
you
ungrateful,
by chance, that it must be your fault, and that you have to feel bad for it.
Did you decide to not include thoughts and inspiration from secular Buddhist teachings, from Peter in Taunton? Actually, I did look at some quotes from the Buddha, because I think that A.C. Grayling is quite right in that actually Buddha himself was probably pretty close to a humanist, and it's quite different from the sort of structure of religion that's been built on him since. But we never actually discussed that, did we? There are things we could have said from Buddha.
God, there are, but honestly, so we didn't go, no, we're definitely not having secular Buddhist teachings. There was so much to put in, and we do have a lot of philosophy from around the world in there. So we tried not to have this kind of exclusive focus on Western philosophy.
I think we did that quite deliberately, didn't we? I mean, it was very important to us to demonstrate the global and long history of humanism. There's lots of books on Buddhism, I suppose, as well, aren't there? I mean, there's lots of books about the sayings of the Buddha or Buddhism. Not so many about Mencius, John Stuart Mill, Bertrand Russell, and Marie Curie.
I love Mencius.
Mencius is brilliant. John, in a secular society, is a national religion actually an advantage because it drowns out the noise and distraction of the religions competing altogether for a say in how society is run?
No, well, no, because that's not a secular society then, is it? Because the principle of secularism is that you don't have a national religion. And I feel really strongly about that. I feel really strongly that we shouldn't have a state religion for all sorts of reasons. But I think the principal one is that we are a diverse, plural society, and that and also that secularist principle that you shouldn't have the state telling you what you should believe, and putting up one particular religion as being the answer, or indeed one particular worldview. So equally, I wouldn't want. I'm going to say this, and Andrew's going to frown at me.
No, you're right.
I wouldn't want the state to be a humanist state. I want the state to be a secular state. I want it to respect all religions and none. I want everybody to be free to pursue their own beliefs and worldview without interference from the state. And we've got this dreadful situation at the moment where, particular religions interfere hugely in our politics, and with much more weight than actually they should have in terms of their representation in our pluralistic society. Yeah. And we have all these faith schools. A third of primary schools are faith schools, and I do actually think that is it stands against children's human rights. that's not respecting their freedom of belief if you're forcing them to say prayers in the classroom. And that's what's happening in these state funded, taxpayer funded faith schools.
Entirely taxpayer funded, exactly, 100%. John's question is a common one though, because it sort of suggests that a national religion can be a sort of stabilizing influence, and I don't personally think there is actually much evidence for that. I think secular states are as stable, and so are multi-confessional states like the Netherlands. That's not a secular state either, but nor is there are other examples like that of states that are. I mean, I don't think that multi-faith approach to the state is the right one. I think the secular approach is the right one, but I don't think there's any evidence that a national religion is per se a stabilizing influence. And in fact, in history, it's been quite the opposite. It's fought for its dominance. It's prevented people from gaining public office or going to university, or like you say, even today, from getting into some state schools by its dominant position. So I think it's pretty pernicious, actually. I think sometimes we don't realize how egregious our own situation is in England. I mean, we're the only state in the world where the law requires daily Christian worship in our state schools. No other state in the world requires that. We're one of only 4 states that allow
world beating.
World beating. Exactly.
And only two countries in the entire world where clerics have automatic seats in government: Iran and the UK, with our automatic seats of bishops in the House of Lords.
Clive asks, is there a difference between secularism and humanism? And we've sort of covered that. Is that, I mean, it obviously depends what you mean by those words, but I think that we would both use the word secularism, as you pointed out in the book that I did 3 years ago, the Secularism, very short introduction to secularism one, as secularism describes an attitude by the state towards religions and beliefs which doesn't take a view, doesn't take a side, tries to give everyone the maximum freedom possible that's compatible with the rights of others, and holds the line on that. So humanism, obviously, as we're discussing, is not that. It's a word to describe an approach to life, a worldview that's based on the sort of things we've been talking about.
But I think most humanists are probably secularist.
The vast majority. I mean, I think there are some humanists who say things a bit like John's question implied, although I'm not saying, whoever you are, John, I'm not saying this is what you believe, but as John's question implied, there are some humanists, though very few that I've met, who think that a national church doesn't do too much harm and you might as well keep it as it is, that sort of view. I don't think that's right. I think that's wrong. But I think there are the vast majority of humanists, I think, we're going to want a secular state and a secular government and a secular approach, for sure.
And aren't we just about to have some kind of anniversary of the disestablishment of the Welsh?
In Wales, that's right. Yeah, it's 100 years since the disestablishment of the church in Wales, which was passed into law in 1914, but didn't come into effect until 1920 because of the First World War. And so, 100 years of disestablishment in Wales. And the church, of course, was disestablished in Ireland in 1870 and was never established in Scotland. The Church of Scotland has a sort of claims a sort of national church status. Yeah, so it's just sorry old England, I'm afraid, who's left with this establishment.
We always seem to be lagging, don't we? England and Wales lagging together in terms of humanist marriages as well. Humanist weddings. Humanist weddings legal in Scotland, legal in Northern Ireland, not
legal in the Channel Islands, not legal in Wales. The disestablishment in Wales was quite radical, because it was not only a disestablishment, it was a disendowment. So they took their money away as well, which I think was quite a good thing to do. Because they are extremely wealthy, as you know.
Well, yeah, of course.
Hillary wants us to suggest a good answer to the question posed to her by her son: isn't humanism just a belief in humans? Why should I put my faith in such an obviously flawed creature? Well, I think it's a misnomer, isn't it? Like you were saying about other animals, because of the word humanist, some people get the mistaken impression that the humanist view of the world is exclusively human-centered, or worshipping humans or something, but obviously it's not. It does describe a contrast. It's humanist, human in contrast with something else, but what's seeking to contrast with is those extra human, non-human, divine or other inhumane principles to which people appeal for knowledge or morals or meaning. It certainly doesn't set up humans in place of gods.
No.
And I know that someone else here actually asks a similar question, saying that perhaps with reference to, this is Neil Bartlett who asks a similar question to the one that Hillary said, which is that does humanism seem exclusive of other living things, given we're at the point of human-made climate chaos and a long history of human destruction? Thinking of Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*. I mean, Yuval Noah Harari's whatever you think of his books, not good at all. He has done a lot of harm with his rather eccentric use of the word humanism to describe sort of negative human-centered philosophies. I think we would both say, wouldn't we, just that that's not what we mean by humanism?
No, absolutely not. And we have a whole chapter in the Little Book of Humanism about that, which is called Children of Earth.
Children of Earth. I think that's so good. I like that. I like that we try to do that with the titles, because one of the things that we didn't, I think, mention in the introduction is that we were absolutely convinced that the book should be relentlessly positive. So often humanism is described as being, a non-religious, not believing in God, not following this, not following that. And so we looked for positive chapter titles. I think Children of Earth was a
it's lovely.
nice
and also,
one.
when you say humanism is described in that way, that's the way that others describe humanism.
Yes,
it's
that's
like
right.
Being
Others.
humanist, we had an opportunity to go, actually, this is what it is.
Exactly.
I mean, that quote from George Eliot, we could never have loved the earth so well if we'd had no childhood in it. If it were not the earth where the same flowers came up again every spring that we used to gather with our tiny fingers as we sat lisping to ourselves on the grass. I mean, it's just lovely. And, as a biologist, I think one of the crucial lessons of modern biology is that humans are exceptional in many ways. So, we have cognition, which, as far as we know, is far in advance of any other animal, although perhaps whales and dolphins are thinking just as profound thoughts as we are. They just don't have hands to hold pens and write it down or type it. But that biology says it knocks us off a pedestal. We've always wanted to put ourselves on a pedestal at the center of the universe, where God is interested in us, and all other species are put at our disposal. And that just, scientifically does not stack up. Our species is a twig on the tree of life. And I love that because it's humbling. However much, we think we're clever or produce amazing culture and all of that, and we do, we also have the capability for massive destruction, which we have to be aware of. And we have the ability to be aware of that too. So that I think that awareness brings a huge responsibility with it. But, ultimately, we are just another evolved species on this earth, and I like not being on a pedestal. I like the fact that it imposes that responsibility on us, but it also gives us context. It gives us a context where you are part of life on this earth. You're part of the story of the planet.
Yeah. There is a God, and her name is George Eliot. That's my view. I think that if I had to make a little temple in my garden, it'd be a temple to George Eliot. Alison Stone asked if we would consider a children's version of the book. No, because there is already the excellent Michael Rosen and Anne-Marie Waters book on humanism for children, which is available again in all good bookshops or on the Humanist UK website, I believe.
But having said that, my kids are, I've got a few copies lying about the house, and they rather like it, and they like the pictures in it as well. And
I think it's pretty age appropriate, actually. I think it would probably, I know that when we did an event about the book in virtually in Parliament last week with the Parliamentary Humanist Group, someone suggested that we raise money to send it to schools because it is quite a good dipper for I think you'd have to be very, very young not to get anything out of it.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot in there.
My children are both like key stage 2, so like older primary, and they're kind of reading little bits of it. So there might be bits of it they don't get, but
it still should go in every child's stocking. That's definitely the case.
Definitely
the case.
Oh, we've got a question about the audiobook.
Yes,
yeah, we're having fun with that, aren't we? So we're hoping that a great diverse range of humanists are going to help us with that. So it should be really fun. And we'll both contribute to it, but we'll have lots of other people, lots of other hopefully quite familiar voices in there too.
Hope so. Anonymous attendee. This is a very interesting question. So this is someone whose wife is a deacon and is religious. They want to bring up, anonymous attendee wants to bring up the question of their lack of religion without threatening her wife's own depression? I think this is such an interesting question, because this is about sort of what they used to call mixed marriages, really, isn't it? Where you've got someone who's very religious and someone who's really not. And of course, very religious people do worry about the people they love not being religious, because of course they think bad things are going to happen to them. And I think that's really a very difficult question to deal with. How do we deal with that? You and I have talked before. I think we were being interviewed for something when was it Robin Ince who was asking us about sometimes shouldn't we just give comfort through falsehood? Sometimes could it be justified to just say, well, no, of course, to pretend, especially with vulnerable people, possibly dying people, but in this case, people who are vulnerable for other reasons. Is it sometimes right to pretend that you believe things that you don't, or that things are true that you don't think are true? And I think this is generally tricky.
I think it's incredibly tricky. It's a very, very personal question, isn't it? Because it depends on the kind of relationship you've got with that person. It depends on how much you can discuss what you've got in common, and then start to talk about what you believe that's different from that other person. And that also, when you've got somebody who is in that vulnerable situation, of course, as a humanist, I would say one of the important things is to be kind. That's got to be part of it. So it's a very this is one of those very, very difficult conundrums that has to be a very personal decision.
And I think the context really matters. I mean, that is obviously a humanist principle, is that no two moral questions are identical. No two moral dilemmas are identical. They're all different. There's all context. And I remember giving the example when we were discussing it before that, if my dying grandmother, and this isn't fortunately something I had to deal with because all of my dying grandmothers were humanists, but if my dying grandmother, who was a believer, had said to me on her deathbed, you do believe that I'll see your grandfather again, won't you? Do you believe, and do you believe too? And because she was worried about my soul or about her future, and she was minutes from death, hours from death, I would say, yes, I do. I think I would have said, yes, absolutely, I believe it. And that would have been that context. But if it had been a child, a 6-year-old child asking me for my beliefs about these things because she was worried about something like that, I would probably have given a different answer. I'd probably have said, no, I don't believe that, because the context there is that she's got her whole life ahead of her. It's a different situation. I would want her to feel that there are different beliefs that she could challenge and investigate. It's all about context, isn't it? I think that quite...
Yeah, definitely. And that thing about children, I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable about talking to children about religion or lack of religion. And again, I think that in faith schools, that children are presented with this idea that everybody has some kind of religion. And the idea of, the fact that more than half the British population is not religious is not discussed in a lot of primary schools. It's like, everyone believes in something. So children are being given this very strange idea, I think, of the diversity of views out there. And I think, when a child asks us if we believe in God, we should be absolutely honest with them. And also, I think sometimes we're probably protecting ourselves from difficult conversations around death. And it's easier to say to children they're in a better place than to actually be honest with them and start talking to them about mortality and what death means.
I think that's really useful point. And I think it raises another point, which is that sometimes you can turn this around and ask, am I just making myself comfortable? But equally, you can ask, if you're asking yourself the question, should I fraudulently express belief to this person in order to make them feel better? You should then ask yourself the question, well, would I like that done to me? Would I like someone to lie to me to make me feel better? And I think that's a different way of looking at the question as well. And that might help. Do you know, we've got 80 questions now and hardly 12 minutes. I don't think we can answer them all.
It's yes or no now then.
It's yes or no, exactly. We have to do them in order. Alice Fuller, one of our former trustees and coordinator of Young Humanists, who has childcare, so wants this read out. Do you think it's important, Alice, that we reveal ourselves as humanists to friends, family, colleagues, and strangers and explain about it? Do you do it, and what's the reaction you get?
So I think it is, and for that reason, which kind of encapsulates the whole kind of idea of doing the Little Book of Humanism, that I think it's a really helpful philosophy. And I think that, again, it's a philosophy which a lot of people are naturally forming without being aware that there is this kind of coherence to what they think, and deep kind of history to it. And I also think that, we've had, our society still, I think, allows religious people to be much more open about their faith than and tends to be quite disinterested in people who are non-faith. And I think we need to change that, and we need to be we need to be happy about our views and proud about saying what we believe in and why we believe in it. I think when you believe something, it comes from deep principles. So I think that definitely, and I do. I mean, it's kind of hard not to, as president of Humanists UK, and it's quite a good that is quite a good thing to be able to say to people when they go, "Are you religious?" And you go, "Well, I'm president of Humanists UK." So no.
But it is a way in, then, isn't it? Yeah. Julie's asking if there are any more books in the pipeline. I'm sure Alice is working on lots of books, but there is, in fact, something else we're hoping to work on together. So
there's another little something coming along in the humanist vein. I'm just finishing a book about ancestors, so a book about prehistory and burials, which will be out in the spring. Which has got a bit, I suppose it's got a bit about burials and a preach to death in it at the end. And that's really interesting to take the long view on it and look at how people have come together to make sense of death socially and differing funerary practices over time.
That is interesting, isn't it? Because there's often somehow an implication with humanist ceremonies that somehow we're trying to replace religious ceremonies. And I always think if you take the long view, religions diminish in importance somewhat in this whole question of human ceremony. The fact is that we are quite sort of, we do ceremonies all the time. We're always like marking things and ritualizing things. And it's true that religion has been in some places at some times one sometimes very important way of doing that. But it's not as if there was somehow a religious past and now there's a humanist presence. There's always been human beings making sense of things through actions, hasn't there?
Yeah, and when you take the long view on it, I mean, that kind of human need to create the narrative, I suppose, in our own lives and to make sense of life and death, and the way that we do that through ritual and through ceremony, that's the enduring thing. The thing which comes and goes is religion. And very often religions will just pick up on whatever rituals were there already. I mean, Christmas is such a fantastic example of that, isn't it? When so many people say to me, do you celebrate Christmas? And I'm like, well,
there's a question here,
and it's called that. Christmas in the, oh, good. So I'm answering that now. So yes, I celebrate Christmas. And in the sense that in Britain, what we tend to call this midwinter festival is Christmas, and you could call it Yule or you could call it whatever you want, really. But there's been a midwinter festival for a very, very long time before the Romans decided that that's when they were going to start celebrating Christmas. So it's the 25th of December was the festival of the unconquered sun before it became apparently the day that Jesus was born on, although there's no documentary evidence, of course, the day that Jesus was born on, but there you go.
So, I think that's right. And you don't feel bad about celebrating Christmas for that reason, do you? And I always think of it's the midwinter festival that we do in this country, just as Thursday is that day of the week. And yes, it's named after Thor, but I don't object to Thursday as a result. I do the thing that we do in our cultures, and we light fire and gather for warmth and give gifts and reaffirm our human. Not every Thursday, I mean every Christmas. You're wearing Thor's hammer. I'm
wearing Thor's hammer, yeah. Not because I worship Thor, but because I rather like it.
Well, I know. That's what you say. Okay.
Like a Viking.
John Plimsoll says, you've dedicated the book to a lot of people. What made you decide to give this lovely dedication? This is because we dedicated it to all those who think for themselves and act for others. And I think that's an old Humanist UK motto, actually.
It is lovely. Yeah. And, it is just basically to whoever opens that book, picks it up and looks at it. It's for them. Yeah.
That's right. Tommy Warburton says on Wikipedia, dangerous place to go. On Wikipedia, it suggests that humanists are atheists, but Tommy is an agnostic. and I don't think this is a question, really.
No, he's just saying that he's agnostic because, God may or may not exist. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And yeah, lots of, humanists tend to be, as I said, either atheists or agnostics. And agnosticism is a perfectly sensible, point of view that you just go, well, there's no evidence, but if somebody turned up with evidence tomorrow, then I'd take a look at it. I suppose I go a bit further than that towards atheism, because we've been looking for a God for a long time.
Yes.
And there's still no evidence.
And it's an incoherent concept, I think.
Yeah. And also the way that the gods of current religions are clearly made up and all borrow off each other, and are also stuffed into the interstices of science at the moment. So, and increasingly smaller interstices. So, that whole God of the gaps thing where you're kind of going, oh, but you can't explain this, so this must be God. And then you go, well, actually, we can explain that. And they go, but there's a smaller bit that you can't explain, so that must be God. And then God gets squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. But I don't believe in God in the same way that I don't believe in unicorns and fairies. So if somebody comes up to me and shows me absolutely incontrovertible proof that A, I'm not mad, and B, there is a unicorn in the front garden, I'll believe in it. Equally, if there's a deity standing there.
But that's a good point, because it also illustrates, like, another reason why you don't believe in unicorns is that how unicorns came to be. They're a human imagination. There's a horse and there's horns, animals with horns. And at some point, a human being had an imaginative leap and created in his or her mind this idea. And that's gods as well, isn't it? You can see God, what gods are.
Oh, it's fascinating.
They look like us,
and you can trace the historical connections between different religions and all of that.
And that, I think, is strong evidence against the existence of gods.
Yes, I think it is, that you can trace the development of those ideas. Yeah.
Paul Godwin asks, what would you see as the fundamental belief? I assume Paul means of a humanist approach. For example, is it a belief in creating the greatest happiness or something similar? I distrust all fundamental beliefs, actually. I think
I do. It's it's a mixture of things, isn't it?
I think so. I don't even like sort of great ethical systems, really. I think sometimes you're doing one thing, sometimes you're doing another. You're thinking about the consequences, so maybe you're a bit utilitarian, but at the same time, you don't want to be that person that everybody will hate because you've done this harm. So are you actually a bit of a virtue ethicist as well? You're doing different things, I think, all the time, and then you're moderating and judging things according to your own experience and your own conscience and your own values. Big systems scare me a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
I think they're a bit humanizing.
Do you know, if it's anything, it's probably questions. It's probably
yes.
It's probably a process rather than a thing. So it's probably that process of critical thinking, which brings you to approach the world rationally, but also makes you critique your own morals and ethics in a certain way as well. So I would say asking questions, constant reflection, constant asking of questions.
So less a belief, more a process, a commitment,
more of a way of life.
Yeah. Well, that's good, isn't it? It was one of the things that we said about the book, is that we wanted the humanist approach to life to appear through this book, not as just a philosophical set of beliefs, but as a way of living, as a worldview, yes, but also an approach to life. And I think that's right. Rachel wants to know if we're going to build on the book to raise awareness of Humanists UK. Yes, absolutely. Humanists UK is firmly advertised, of course, in the last page of the book. Very, very important. So it's not just sort of 30,000 copies of the book going out there. It's 30,000 adverts for Humanists UK as well, which is a nice way of,
and all the amazing work that Humanists UK does. I mean, sometimes people say to me, why is it some kind of club? Is it some kind of organization? Do I have to belong to Humanists UK to be a humanist? And of course you don't. But we are in a society where we can clearly see that many things should change and need to be changed for the better, and that it's fantastic to have an organization which is basically working towards that, which is looking at everything from the complete anachronism of faith schools in British society to international human rights issues. I think that's the purpose of the organisation, is to enshrine humanist principles and to help humanists to move the world into that better place, and also all the lovely, the fantastic work that Humanists UK does, training all those celebrants that are there to help people put those rituals in place, naming ceremonies, weddings and funerals as well. So that's a really important strand of what Humanists UK does as well.
I mean, I think that, and that's the same in humanist organizations all over the world. I mean, it's obvious that the model of a humanist organization is onto something, in relation to genuine human needs, because everywhere in the world where there are humanist organizations, they do those things. They do advocacy and try to fight for social change, but they also provide that fellowship and connection to humanism for people and community services to outside society. So I think it's quite I think that actually speaks to genuine human needs. Because it's everywhere. Okay, now there is absolutely no way that in the next 1 minute we are going to get through 70 questions. I don't know whether these questions all disappear when this webinar ends. I hope they don't, because then we could maybe address them in some other way. I'm afraid I think we should defer the question about humanist ceremony to a humanist celebrant, who your name isn't here, it's just your email address, but I can tell you that every humanist celebrant is so impeccably trained and is themselves such a fountain of excellent ideas and suggestions that they will be able to answer your question better than we can. Were we influenced by A.C. Grayling's good book? I read it and was very enjoyed A.C. Grayling's good book very much. I particularly liked it. Yeah, he compiled. It did a bit of what we did, really, apart from he didn't attribute the quotes. So he took humanist quotes from all traditions all over the world and then just sort of assembled them without attributing them into the good book. And his point, obviously, was that's what the Bible is, by the way. The Bible is a collection of things from all over the place that just got codified together by accident. His Bible was by design, which I think makes it better than the Bible. But we wanted to add some of our own views, didn't we, to this book? We didn't want to just do a book of quotes.
Yeah. And the biographies, I think, are lovely too. Yeah,
I think that brings it alive. Actually, people, look, we can't get through it all, and our time is over, unless you want to extend it by 5 minutes, Alice. I know that we have to. We've got a hard stop. We've got a hard. I think we can extend it for 5 minutes. We've got a hard stop at 7:40, haven't we? But I will randomly select a question out of the.
Can I select Paul Barnes?
Yeah, please.
Saying, as an anthropologist, have we found any evidence? Have I found any evidence for characteristics we associate with goodness, such as empathy and self-sacrifice, emerging as a survival advantage in early humans or their ancestors? That's a really interesting question, because when we look at the emergence of modern human behavior, which is taken to be indicative of human cognition, then one of the things we look at is whether we can see any evidence of individuals caring for other individuals. So if we see evidence of horrendous healed fractures that obviously show that person was looked after, for instance, and we do see that in very, very early human societies. But very much I see the human capacities we've been talking about, those better angels of our nature, they are of our nature, they are evolved. And I think that all of this comes from the fact that we are social animals, and we're better when we're working together. We're better when we're collaborating. And I suppose it's a theme in biology which is often overlooked. I think we rather relish the red in tooth and claw in biology, and the idea that everything in evolution is forged through competition. Lynn Margulis, who was the proponent of and the originator of the amazing endosymbiont theory in biology, who should be much better known than she is. Her partner Carl Sagan tends to be the famous one, and she kind of is in his shadow, and she shouldn't be. And she wrote a beautiful book about symbiosis in biology, and cooperation, collaboration, and humans take that to a new level. Because of our culture and our society. So I think it's in us, but it's very natural.
There's so many questions. I think we have to. It would be invidious now to choose only one. And I think that was such a detailed and interesting answer that you gave to the last question that we might as well make that the last question, unless any. Oh, this is a good one, just to show. I'm interested in the answer to this. Do either of us have any superstitions? Do you have any superstitions? Because I once asked Philip Pullman this when we were doing some interviews. Philip Pullman, obviously a good Humanist UK patron, and he then confessed at the end of the interview that he had a lucky pen.
Oh,
and asked, did that make him a bad humanist after all? And I thought, no, I don't think it did actually. It depended what he meant by lucky pen. I think that I think an acceptance of our own characters to some extent, and the fact that we have, ways of doing things that give us comfort, is, as long he didn't really believe it was a lucky pen. He didn't really believe that pen would, from that pen and that pen only would good words flow, for his plotting. He was expressing a sort of human feeling of connection with to an object and its history and its meaning. And I think that those sorts of feelings that are not strictly rational, they're not superstitious, because you don't believe that necessarily that the object will do anything. You feel a connection to it for other reasons, sentimental or emotional.
That's fascinating, I think, cognitively, because you then go, okay, so that kind of feeling of attachment that you have with that object, does that then engender superstition? Does that then kind of lead into superstition? I'm just thinking about it. I don't think I do have any superstitions. I'm racking my brains to try and work out if I do.
Oh, you scientist. You're such a scientist, you see. There you go.
Do you, Andrew?
Don't you ever... well, I don't think so. I mean, sometimes I think that if I can get the bit of paper into the bin 3 times, I might win the lottery. No, I don't think that. I don't. But I do feel a non-rational attachment to certain objects and rituals, I think. But I feel like I do, or maybe that's just how I make my cup of tea. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I do.
That's habit.
I don't really believe
superstition.
Yeah, is it? Is it? Maybe I don't know what superstition is. I do think that I think maybe in the back of my head, I might think that if I put my cup of tea on the left of the kettle rather than the right of the kettle, it won't be as good. Because I always put my cup of tea on the right when I'm making
tea. It's the traps that are there in our brain, and I think they've been in our brain for a long time. And I think that's part of why we need to critique ourselves all the time. My very good friend Ben Garrett, who spent a long time hanging out with chimpanzees, is convinced that chimpanzees are superstitious. And there's some very good evidence that chimpanzees do very odd rituals which don't seem to be at all linked to survival. They definitely do cultural things like going around sticking bits of grass in their ears and thinking that looks rather nice, and then all of them do it. But they also do strange things. There was a group of chimpanzees that started laying stones at the bottom of trees, and the researchers looked at them going, what the hell are they doing? And they all started to do it, and they carried on doing it for a bit, and it was like a little religion that they'd invented. And
of course, it must come from somewhere.
I think the tendencies to do those things, to do those repeated acts, and then probably to make sense of them afterwards is very, very ancient. Yeah. Something to watch out for anyway, Andrew, next time you make it.
It is. You know what I'm going to do? That's what I'm going to do. In the morning when I make my cup of tea, it's too late for tea now. When I make my cup of tea in the morning, I'm going to put my cup on the left of the kettle. And if you don't hear from me again, that's why. I know, exactly. I was right all along. So many questions, so many wonderful questions. Available in all good bookshops, the Little Book of Humanism. Some questions have been, where can I get it from? You can get it from everywhere. Here it is. It's available in all good bookshops. Please fill stockings with it this Christmas. We absolutely want to get the message out there. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the questions, even if we couldn't answer them. We'll try and save them and deal with them in some other way, in a bigger way. And maybe we'll try and have an event like this again sometime next year.
Yeah,
so
thank you so much. I mean, it's lovely to have so much engagement and so many questions. I do feel awful that we can't get around to them all. So we will go through and have a look at them.
We'll do something with absolutely.
If you follow Humanist UK on Twitter or follow me on Twitter, we might make it obvious where we're going to answer all these questions.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. Goodbye. Enjoy reading. Happy reading.
Stay safe. Keep well.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Get the vaccine.